Here today to share about a couple of pilots in California that I'm evaluating, both based on this concept of universal basic mobility, or UBM. And the idea of UBM is that some basic, free or affordable floor of transportation services should be provided, as it should be considered a basic need, as it's requisite to meet other basic needs like food and healthcare. And in California, there are at least 4 ongoing or planned pilots testing out this idea. The 2 that I'm evaluating, and there's another one in the Central Valley, and I think LA has one coming up as well. So my research is funded by California Senate Bill 1, as well as SPIN, a shared e-bike and scooter company. And my evaluation considers how these mobility services provided in each of the pilots are utilized by the participants, as well as any economic, health, or hedonic outcomes that flow from changes to travel behavior. The Oakland Pilot focuses on East Oakland, which is one of the most economically disadvantaged areas in the California Bay Area. The city selected 500 residents to receive $300 on a prepaid credit card that can be used just for public transit, car share, and shared micromobility. And the Bakersfield pilot, Bakersfield is in the California Central Valley, aims to support young people so they can access school and jobs, so 18 to 24-year-olds who were identified through a partnership with the county Network for Children's Dream Center, which is a comprehensive social services resource center for current and former foster youth. And this pilot was meant to be 12 months, providing 100 participants with up to 5 free rides on SPIN e-scooters or e-bikes per day. SPIN also purchased bus passes for participants, although most already had them through other social programs. And my evaluation includes pre- and post-pilot surveys and mid-pilot interviews, as well as analysis of SPIN vehicle use data for Bakersfield. In Oakland, they didn't get data on particular modes. It's sort of an aggregate download from the card company about spending on each service. And then based on our baseline surveys, which are completed, and our mid-pilot interviews, which are ongoing, I can characterize the participants in each pilot and share some tentative results and lessons learned. So in Oakland, based on our survey at the start of the program, nearly half of the participants are very low income, though most are employed, and less than half have a car. Average age is 39. In Bakersfield, they're much different. Average age is 21. Almost all are very low income, and about half are neither employed nor in school. And this is this population we call disconnected youth that aren't in school and aren't employed, and most don't have a car. Looking at baseline travel behavior, Oakland participants most frequently traveled to the grocery store, to work, and to visit friends and family, and their most commonly used modes at baseline were public transit. Bakersfield participants had the same top 3 destinations, although traveled to work less often. And their most common modes at baseline were walking and car. And in this case, it was usually ride hailing or getting a ride from a friend. As far as their experiences coming into the pilot, and this testifies to the need for the pilot, about a third of Oakland participants reported that they could not afford the transportation that they wanted to use and that they didn't feel safe using the modes that they could manage to afford. 1/4 had recently missed work due to transportation issues, and a third had missed a healthcare appointment. Among Bakersfield participants, most of these numbers were even higher, with the exception of safety, although still 40% weren't feeling safe when they were traveling. And our early findings indicate that both UBM pilots have been successful in supporting participants to meet basic needs. So I'll illustrate with just a few quotes from Oakland participants because we've completed our interviews there. So this one's telling us that the pilot helped them get to health care. And another described improved cultural connection, being able to get to preferred groceries, in this case, Mexican markets. And participants told us various ways that they used the money that they saved, not having to pay for transportation as much, to pay for instead basic things like utilities, toilet paper, pet food. So now I want to move into lessons learned. The first lesson is about communication. So when implementing pilots with any population, you want to be sure to brand materials clearly and consistently and to make information accessible. But this is perhaps especially important to support participants with potentially fewer resources to access information, such as those who don't speak English fluently, may not be able to easily make a call or reference a website to get answers about the program and what it entails. And here's some images from the outreach flyer for the Oakland Pilot. The city had some delays implementing the program because of difficulties getting approval for the branding they wanted to use. So unfortunately, they had to proceed with a sort of vagueness to some of the outreach materials. And the prepaid card that selected applicants received in the mail came in sort of a nondescript envelope. And you can actually see a picture of the card here that the woman is holding. It says the word akimbo, which has nothing to do with the pilot. So a lot of participants didn't realize that they'd been selected. I think a lot of mail got thrown out. They didn't recognize it. So quite a few followed up with the city and ended up getting their card that way. But many presumably never became aware they were selected. So, and branding has also been a minor issue in Bakersfield. Since virtually all the participants already had a bus pass, the only free service they are receiving through this pilot is the spin, e-scooters and e-bikes. And the participants that we've talked to so far, they just refer to the program as spin. So it's not a problem for them, but as an evaluator, it makes it a little tricky because you want to be sure that when you're talking to people, they understand the boundaries of what you're asking them about. So another best practice, in addition to having good branding, is to start out any interview or survey research by defining the term that you're using for the name of the program, and or asking the participants how they refer to it so you can use their language when you ask them about it. Another aspect of communication to consider in mobility pilots is to provide adequate training and education on new mobility modes. And the Bakersfield pilot was able to provide training through the Dream Center staff, who showed participants how to use the scooters and bikes in a one-to-one setting when they signed them up, and Spin had trained the staff. However, other aspects of educating the participants didn't always take hold. For example, one participant I talked to was unaware it was illegal to ride a bike while intoxicated, an e-bike. So I'm certain this was communicated to them, but this is another reason to provide information throughout a pilot. So not just at the outreach on materials that are probably going to get thrown away. And something perhaps phone notifications or in-person reminders if that's feasible, or information on printed materials that participants have to retain to be able to use the services. And the folks we talked to in Oakland so far, where there was no training for any of the offered services. They offered a lot of services, including shared micromobility, no training. And participants told me they were leery of shared e-bikes and scooters. Even one or two who were experienced bicyclists recounted stories of knowing someone or hearing about someone who was injured, mainly talking about scooters. So they suggested that training on vehicle use, but also resources to help them identify what would be safe routes to take on e-bikes and scooters might help encourage use. And some of these communication issues, as you probably gathered, tie in with the topic of safety. So in the definitions that I've seen of UBM, I've seen it that it's about accessibility and it's about affordability, but I would advocate for adding safety to that definition. So this basic floor of transportation should be accessible, affordable, and safe. If it's not safe, it may not be helping. In fact, if you provide access to unsafe options for those who can't afford other things, they're going to be more likely to use those, even if they don't feel safe because they have a need. So this is an extremely important consideration. And then the last lesson learned that I want to share about is planning for continuity. So there's been turnover in leadership and staff and oversight staff at both pilots in both cities, as well as changes to the services provided. So for example, Spin initially had e-scooters in Bakersfield. They, at one point during the pilot, took them all out, and now they have e-bikes. And the shared bike and scooter market is evolving rapidly. You know, new companies coming, old ones going, acquisitions left and right. So also there's been a shocking amount of vandalism with shared bikes and scooters in both of these cities. Spin was involved in the Oakland Pilot as well, and they ended up pulling their vehicles before it got started because of the amount of vandalism. So a lot of this is a function of the risks of innovations. So as Sean's probably familiar, we have these new and exciting things. We don't know everything about them yet, and there can be risks. So the degree that you can plan for these things, definitely do. Participants have also had issues reliably finding the vehicles and having them operate correctly. And some of that's related to the vandalism. And then finally, plan the end of your pilot just as you plan the launch. So I think we tend to focus on getting things going, but what about winding things down and cutting them off? So right now, leadership of both pilots don't have a clear end game. So there was a rolling recruitment in Bakersfield for the first several months of the year. And so we don't know yet if the services will end at the end of the calendar year, which was the original plan, or kind of 12 months after each person signed up, or maybe 12 months after the majority of participants were enrolled. And then in Oakland, they haven't decided yet what they're going to do with the remaining funds, last I heard, from so many cards not being activated. And this is, of course, important because you want to make sure you maximize the benefit of the program that you get the funding to do, and you want to make sure you can help as many people as possible. So I'm happy to answer questions now at the end, and here's my email if you want to contact me at a later point.
All right, Angela, thank you very much. This was really fascinating. All right, so any questions? And kind of as we wait for people to raise their hands, one question I had was just in retrospect, would you have wanted to wait? You mentioned branding being an issue. In retrospect, would you said it would have been better to wait to send out the materials until you had the branding approved?
I can't really speak for Oakland. I probably don't know all the details of and the contingencies they were thinking about. They had to spend the money by the end of the year, so that was a big one. But maybe go with a different branding that you didn't need approval for. I think they were wanting to call it a mobility wallet initially, and now on their website it says UBM Pilot. But yeah, I think that they should have probably picked a name. The bigger issue was probably the cards being unidentifiable. And then also on that flyer, I didn't talk about it, but they offered so many services, which was wonderful. But a lot of participants I talked to weren't aware of all the things that were offered. Also, the cards weren't meant to be used on ride hailing, but a couple of people I talked to used them on ride hailing. So I think they didn't quite catch that. And then also things were available that people weren't aware of, like the ferry. It was meant to be used on all public transit, which includes the ferry. And some people didn't know that. And some people didn't know it includes bike share. So on the flyer, they showed a bunch of logos of different services. On the website, there's a couple more, I think. So just having that consistency and is also a part of the outreach.
So Sherwood asks, how are the services in Bakersfield connected? Was it a single account with the shared card for the bus and the Spin?
No, they wanted to do that. The bus there is really struggling, and they didn't have a lot of resources to help with the pilot. It was good of them to want to engage, but yeah, Spin ended up buying passes, and those passes didn't get used because folks already had them and they didn't tend to like to use the bus. And the bus is operating less than it was at one point. So I think it's struggling, but they did want to do that. And we were hoping on the evaluation side to get data from that so we could track how people used the buses as well.
And then maybe one last question for me was just, so how did they limit the prepaid card? I mean, you mentioned some people using it for ride hailing. Was that pretty effective, or was it kind of mainly the honor system? Like, please only use it for these
Yeah,
things.
I don't know the mechanics behind it. The company is called Usio, USIO, that was the vendor for the cards. And I'm pretty sure they limited it to some extent. The folks I talked to, and I think they were very forthcoming, it didn't sound like they used it for anything that wasn't transportation. The only thing that I heard about was the ride hailing, sneaking in the ride hailing. And the person who did that didn't know they weren't supposed to. But so part honor system, I think, but I think it did restrict a lot.
All right. Thank you so much, Angela. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So our next presentation is from Carrie